In this episode of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Maureen Palmer, who is an author, documentarian, a storyteller, and she's recently written a book called You Don't Have to Quit. We're going to have a talk with her about what does your job look like? Like, which one are you? Author, documentarian, or what? How would you describe the work that you do these days?
My daughter found a name for it: knowledge translation.
Ooh.
And I thought, oh my goodness. She heard me do a radio interview and she said, Mom, that's what it is. It's knowledge translation. It's taking sort of disparate elements that you might see out in the broad culture and pair it with things you're seeing in your own relationships and find a story that will make what you're trying to say accessible to a lot of people, whether it's a documentary or a book or something you tell your friends over a drink or a coffee.
Well, let's not downplay the importance of that, because you go, oh, okay, isn't that a nice moniker to have? But to be able to do that is a very interesting skill. I'm immediately sort of drawn to Cicero's 5 Canons of Rhetoric, where he talks about how important it is to understand the worldview of your audience and then invent the right story for them. And so you're having to do that on a day-to-day basis.
And actually, I think it was one of our skills as a documentary duo, Helen Slinger and I in Bountiful Films. What you have to do is you have to anticipate what the viewer's going to want to see 18 months, 2 years down the road, because that's the broadcast cycle, right? You go into various broadcasters and you pitch ideas, and you have to be, to a certain extent, prescient. Like in 2012, I did a documentary called Sexed Up Kids, which was all about the confluence of extreme easy porn access online for young boys, like 11, 12, 13, and the growing sexualization of young girls, and then social media, which created this powder keg. And you see these bits and pieces starting to happen around you. Like a friend says, you would not believe what my son saw on the school bus today. He told me about it. He came home crying because one of his friends showed us something online. And I'm like, what was it? 12-year-olds talking about porn, right?
Yeah.
Another person tells me about their daughter. And then you go, okay, this is coming together as a proposal for the CBC.
It's similar to what you must have had to go through in the writing of your book, You Don't Have to Quit. Because, as you say, you have to be prescient. You started to watch what was happening during the pandemic.
Yes.
So what does a day look like for you that allows you to start to glean these disparate pieces of information that make you go, okay, something's happening here, and I need to pull this knowledge together and share it?
Well, first of all, it's a long game. Before I even met Michael, my partner with the alcohol use disorder, Helen Slinger and I would go to Toronto for, as we like to say, the $1,000 cup of coffee and pitch our projects to the CBC. And maybe 4 or 5 years in a row, we would pitch a version of the alcohol story. And it would have names like alcoholism, character flaw, or chronic illness. And each year the CBC would go, no. And then Mike and I met. And we wrote a first book together, which was a blend of memoir and science, which told his life story. And then we went to the CBC and they said, yes, now that's a documentary for the nature of things, which we did, Mike's Search for Evidence-Based Substance Use Treatment. What happened was the world got expansive for us after that. And we were talking a lot to people about a concept called before stage 4. Like, you would never find cancer at stage 1 and wait to stage 4 to treat it, but that's the common approach to alcohol use disorders. So we were part of a conference that the Canadian Mental Health Association sponsored. And there seemed to be an opening of the idea, embrace of harm reduction as a way to deal with alcohol. And then the door kind of swung shut. And so I went away and started thinking quietly about, why is this? Why is the idea of just learning to drink less as opposed to never hitting such resistance? And then the pandemic happened, and everywhere people started drinking way too much. including my friends, including clients of Mike's who he hadn't talked to in 5 years. Their husbands and wives were calling back saying, we got a problem. I would be on Zoom calls where every single woman on it, and these are my friends or my relatives, had a glass of wine, or 1 or 2 or 3. So we started getting people saying, what do I do about this? And that became the basis for the book.
So coming back to as a job, because that's what it is, how do you structure your day so that you're building towards something? Because it's not the kind of, okay, your boss is expecting you or your client demands this. You have to have a certain kind of self-discipline that pushes you forward. And so what does your day look like to move you in that direction?
You know, my family and my friends who just heard you say I have a self-discipline are all cackling with laughter right now.
Because they don't recognize it?
I think I have a little bit of ADHD. And I have to, and it's my training in daily journalism that forces me. I have a to-do list and I have to schedule my time. And the day begins at 5 a.m. I used to produce morning radio. I can't help it. I have a coffee and I read 3 or 4 newspapers and a lot of blogs, and I watch some videos and I start to see what is percolating throughout the culture. And then I start to make notes. And when I started the book proposal, I made notes over a couple of months with conversations that Mike and I had on walks, so we'd record them. And I started to see that there was going to be a book proposal in this. I didn't want to do documentaries anymore because we couldn't really travel during the pandemic, but I felt there was a need for this book. And so from 5 till 7, deep reading, and then I would go for a walk, and then usually from like 10 till noon, write. And then when the book started to happen, I would write like the wind grasshopper between 5 and 8 in the morning. Because if you look at this, there's hundreds and hundreds of footnotes, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of time verifying your sources, making calls, and then going back and writing again.
Which can be mind-numbing.
It is.
And yet you still have to do it.
Yeah, and then you have to, when it comes time to actually publish the book, click on every link and make sure they're still active. And some of them aren't. So, I mean, I had a really good team supporting me from page 2, copy editors, people whose sole job it was to make sure that every sentence was spelled correctly. It's arduous, and it really, I wouldn't do it over. Just, what was I thinking?
Okay, but part of this also, though, is that you then had to negotiate to get the book published. So you have to be a negotiator. You have to be a salesperson.
You have to convince somebody that your idea is worthwhile and that people are going to buy it, and that whomever is working with you, it's worth an investment of their time. And I heard some terrible statistics while I was writing, and one of them was, I think there's something like tens of thousands of books published every year in the US, and something like 10% sell more than 2,000 copies.
2,000, yeah.
Yes. So
right. You're not going to retire on that.
No, you're not going to retire. And I mean, equally onerous, and Mike says this to me, you have to continue promoting that book. And I go, I don't want to. Christmas is coming. I need to bake. I have grandchildren. I want to go for more hikes. Then the universe keeps sending me little messages that I have to keep doing this. And you find once you do something like this and you get exhausted, you find in different ways that you're getting, what's the word? Validation for having made the choice.
Well, you went from, okay, I've sold it to someone else. Now I have to sell it. I still have to stay in the business of selling it. I've got to put the information out there. That's how I saw that you were doing this.
Yes.
And it prompted me to write to you and say, okay, I think this is a very interesting topic, one that matters. Will you come and do an interview? Which also means it's another part of your job. You've got to get out there and talk about the book.
And I'm very grateful that you did that. Thank you very much. I don't really mind, because of having worked my whole life in media, I don't mind doing interviews. I do mind being a little pushy. Like I have to, even if people have said no to you once or twice, like there's a bunch of newspapers that I think would really benefit if they would excerpt my book over the Christmas holidays, right? So I've had a few no's, a few maybes. So now I'm circling back to the maybes because you have to keep going. And I'm probably going to do 2 hours a day for the foreseeable future of promotion.
So you are an independent business person.
I am an independent business person, and I actually have been one for 20 years. And I really appreciate it. I'm very lucky.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario.
And did you envision, oh yeah, one day I'm going to be out promoting a book that I've written?
I'm an immigrant. I was born in Scotland, and we lived in Ireland. Then we came here. My dad got a job as probably one of the first male nurses in Canada. And we grew up, 4 of us, around a table where dinner, Dad would say things in his Scottish brogue, true or false. The British Empire is the greatest thing that's ever been created for mankind. And of course, the 4 of us kids would go, oh my God.
Nay.
Pretty big, provocative, right? It inspired a love of learning and conversation. And then around my 10th or 11th birthday, they got me a radio. And I'd sit under the covers in Sudbury, Ontario, and get like WBC and all these East Coast radio stations. And I'd heard talk radio for the first time in my life. I thought, oh my God, I got to get into that. So I went to Ryerson, now called Metropolitan University in Toronto.
And studied journalism?
Yes.
And you graduate from there, and where'd you go?
I went to the CBC. I was very lucky. They were hiring a graduating student for Morningside every summer for a summer job.
With Peter Zosky.
It was Don Heron at the time.
Don Heron.
Yeah, I'm old.
Wow. Well, he was fantastic. I used to listen to him all the time.
I just lucked into that.
And were you still there by when Peter Zosky came along?
I had a little bit of Peter Zosky time, but by then I was mostly producing morning radio in Edmonton, moving around with the CBC.
So how long were you with the CBC, and what different roles did you have there?
I started as a researcher and associate producer on Morningside, and then did a similar job at the CBC in Sudbury. And then Edmonton, where I produced morning radio, and then did some other radio shows there, and then went to CBC TV in Edmonton, and then moved to CBC in Vancouver.
And then you go, okay, I'm going out on my own.
Well, I got a great enticement to do so. There was a period where TLC, the Learning Channel, and Discovery Channel brought a lot of production here to Vancouver, where they could get a lot of us to work for a very good salary for them, but still a really good value for their dollar, because our dollar is so much cheaper. So I got an opportunity and took a leave, and I was very grateful for the opportunity, and I never went back.
You ultimately created Bountiful Films.
With my partner, Helen Slinger.
Which is a risk in itself.
It was, but we also had timing and luck on our side, because when we created Bountiful was the period of big cable TV expansion in Canada. So we had a Canadian Discovery Channel, the Food Network, the History Channel. So there were all kinds of opportunities just exploding, especially here in Vancouver. And the CBC had a very successful couple of documentary programs. A lot of our former colleagues went and ran those programs. So we had built-in relationships already.
What would you say is a characteristic that you possess that helped you navigate your way along this, in many ways, unpredictable road?
If I'm going to be honest, I would say it's my ability to build relationships that sustained me when I wasn't very good at my job. If I had a mental health challenge, and I had a few, or I had attention issues, I think I have ADHD or ADD for sure, I would credit Helen Slinger publicly for developing my rigor. Like, I couldn't have written this book if Helen and Sue Rideout hadn't been helpful, so helpful in teaching me how to be really dogged and correct. And that's from rigor, doing it over and over again.
Wow, isn't that something? And as you said that about building relationships, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with Chief Perry Bellegarde when he was the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He was in here to do an interview with me. And he said something that I went and I wrote it down, put it up on my wall, it's still there. He said, if you can't build relationships, you can't build anything. And he's so right. And it is that network of relationships that open opportunities, where we support one another. It's fundamental.
And say I'm sorry a lot. I make mistakes, right? And if I do something boneheaded, I'm sorry. I really shouldn't have said that. I didn't mean it. Please forgive me. You know, who doesn't,
you mean a little hubris and humility are important things as well. Yes, I agree.
And I find the older I get, the more that comes easily to me, and the more that I feel it has paid off for me in tremendous relationships with people who maybe I never would have thought had been my friends if I hadn't made myself vulnerable.
Well, thank you for giving us a bit of insight into your job, your past jobs, your career path. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.